this business of innovation, one of the things is, from my perspective, I actually have difficulty understanding not innovating in the sense that I can't shut off thinking of new ideas if I tried. So it sort of was an interesting thing thinking about this, about how do you put yourself in another person's position? Because my problem is, in one day, I think about enough things that I can't possibly implement them in 10 lifetimes, at least not with the funding I currently have. And in fact, I think I could be pathologically committed to a mental institution for the number of URLs I've grabbed with ideas that I'd like to follow up that I'll never have time for, because each one is only $10 a year, right? So where do you stop? So I have Business Modelpedia, antihypocrisy.org. You know, I could go on, and all of these things, each of them are, you know, they're very diverse. But in any case, I think that having these free associations is both a gift and it's a curse, depending on your point of view and what you're trying to achieve. Anyway, so let me show you something that I built a very long time ago, like over 20 years. And I want to say that because at the time in particular, it was even more sort of out of the box than it is now. And in fact, one of the reasons I built it is I was completely desperate, because at the time that I was doing this was in the sort of late 80s, the split between technology and the rest of the world was enormous. There was no internet, basically no personal computers. So you had people who were technically competent, which were white men in basements with no facial expressions. And then you had the rest of the world, women, dance, fun, socially competent people, at least marginally so, you know. And so I was actually desperate to be able to communicate who I was inside, which merged those worlds in a way that was pretty seamless. So my reason for innovating was pure desperation to find a language and a home. I really didn't have any choice, because there was no home. I didn't find the basements particularly interesting, and I didn't have the skills or really know how to be in the other world. Plus, I really loved what technology could do, and I can share some of the things that as a youth I did and my parents allowed. So I'll go into it anyway. What you're about to see was built about 20 years ago. We're still selling them today all over the world, actually, which is sort of interesting. We're just iron dust and a choreographed magnetic field. I'll just show you a little piece of it. That's real time. There's no special effects. You're seeing something that's an actual physical device. And the thing is, it achieved what I wanted, which is it instantly connected me to the broad spectrum of people I wanted to, meaning the incredibly anally focused, total nerd types would say, you know, what microprocessor are you using? And this was programmed originally on 5 1/4-inch floppy disks, for those people who remember that. You know, a crazy old, you know. Now it's running so fast that what took 20 minutes to compile, and I went to lunch when I built that, is less than the time I can take to type a second keystroke, which is pretty impressive. It's gone up by a factor, you know, 10,000. Anyway, but it touched people in all the ways that I had been hoping. So in that sense, it was a real success, meaning the people who like dance, the people who like sort of watching people's faces, and you know, were socially interested, and the hardcore techies. Now, whether they could talk to each other varied. Okay. But I guess what I would say is probably the thing that maybe I have that's most value to impart, maybe, is the idea that, and it's also how I started this and where I really came from, was merging emotional sensitivity with technical competence. And one of the things I think that is grossly undervalued in education is understanding the importance of emotional anything. I mean, meaning it's all focused on content. And if you ask me the question, what's more important, how you feel when you're learning something or exactly what you learned, they're not even close. The how you feel when you're learning is 10 to 100 times more important for no other reason than the fact that to learn anything complicated takes an amount of effort that's staggering. And you were talking about the failures here. I mean, all this stuff. I've never done anything that was easy for me. It's a huge amount of work, and you have to be concentrating potentially in the classroom. There's homework. There's after you get out of school, and unless you feel good about what's going on, and good can be very broadly defined, but it can't be, I feel horrible, stupid, and this is pointless. Okay, there's no chance of having anything good happen. So I think really paying attention to that is critical. And I think people don't do that nearly enough. Now, I also think people are enormously self-limiting. I'm going to make an exception of Stanley, who I think is the least self-limited person I've heard ever speak. And it reminds me of the joke that says, were it not for physics and law enforcement, I would be unstoppable. Okay? I did not make that up, but I love that. Okay? And I think you're perfect for that. I'm not. But in any case, I think that people are enormously self-limiting. And I do some math teaching, and for example, there are a lot of students that this is like tutoring, one-on-one at the Harvard Extension School. There are a lot of students who have never had the experience, I think, of understanding anything. So they're trying to understand a particular thing built on lower level things, but none of them have ever been understood. They've all been memorized, and so they're in this sea of memorization. And it's very, very hard because what I want to do is go back to the very beginning, but that means like 17 courses ago, like how, and so I think that people just having a sense of what's going on is key, and I'm partly mentioning that because I think people's internal state, again, Stanley excluded, okay, is frequently things like they start to think about something, they get confused, and where their mind goes is I'm stupid or any number of negative things, and these branch points are happening so fast that the person is barely aware of them, and they're fed back on themselves, So it gets very, very bad. So I think that's not good, and I think people need to pay a lot of attention to that. I also want to focus on the fact that our technology landscape is changing things. Meaning, it used to be that people who had knowledge had value, and that's not true anymore. Okay, people who have knowledge do not have value anymore. People who may know how to teach may have value, but not who have knowledge. I can get more on the internet than any textbook in 5 minutes. And so I think the role of teachers is very much more to listen to the students, to be a listener and what they call sort of active listener, and reflect back to the students who they are, because that's the one thing you can't get on the internet, is someone who's really going to listen to you and say, I notice these things about who you are. And that's not what teachers are normally doing now. They're shoving out information, but that really doesn't have value. I mean, I can find. I don't mean to belabor that point, but it's going to be. I just can find a lot of information on the web. Now, I want to, in terms of sort of my background, my parents gave me a lot of freedom. Meaning they did things like buy me 50,000 volt rated gloves and a carpet for the floor so that when I was doing my experiments as a little kid, I might make it to this day alive. The only rule was that I couldn't draw more power from the house circuitry than at night than a certain level, because their lights flickered and they got seasick when they were reading in bed. Okay, so it was very, very flexible. I unfortunately did detonate gunpowder and almost blinded myself. I did lots of other experiments, I mean, ranging from, I'd heard that candles work by having a vapor of the wax, vaporized in a gas form, and then it would burn by continuing that light. So I figured, okay, why don't I get a large pot of wax, heat it up with a propane torch or a hot plate, wait till it reaches that smoke state, and then ignite it, which I did in our basement, which was a wood house. And I saw a ball of fire hit the roof and expand about that far. And I'm like, Oh my God. Fortunately, I had enough information to have had a lid, and I closed the lid, and the thing was out, and my heart rate was unbelievable. I was like, like this. And I also did lots of other things. I mean, these are just sort of random fun stories because they're sort of amusing. I had electromagnets that I made when I was little that was powerful enough to suck the entire TV screen from the electron gun off the screen, which I used to play with. Let's see, what else? I don't know. There was, I arc welded with car batteries where I wasn't wearing a shirt, and because of the ultraviolet light, I got a horrible sunburn, which I never forgot about. So I was wearing the glasses, but every part of me other than the glasses was bright red. Okay, now here's actually a point that I've done a lot more thinking about sort of STEM stuff than general creativity in general. And one of the things I want to say also is that the whole culture of science and STEM stuff has this enormous focus on the truth of things rather than the context in which they're being presented. So let me give you an example that was really important to my sanity and sort of growing up, because I couldn't figure. I would listen to these conversations between sort of academic types, and they would be emotionally very unpleasant, and I could never really get a handle on what was going on. And I realized finally that the question of whether what you said was true was entirely unrelated to why you said it in the beginning. And I just want to, so that, for example, if you ask people in an academic or sort of formal environment, why did they say what they say, they almost invariably will tell you why what they said was true, not why they chose to say it. And let me make the point of why I'm saying this. Suppose you're in an argument with your wife or husband, and you say, you're fat. Well, in the middle of some random conversation, they say, you're fat. Well, the question isn't whether their fat is true or not. The question is, why the hell did you say that at this point? Okay? And the problem is, in certain emotional interactions, that question is a little bit understood. It's not understood at all in academia. You try to push people to say, why did you choose to say that among the millions of things you could say? They often don't even know, because they're operating out of some feeling state. And all of this stuff very much affects education. I mean, it may sound like I'm rambling, and I am a little bit, which I warned you about in the beginning, but these things are key to how students are learning. The question is not whether what you said is true. The question is, was it a helpful thing to say? Okay, and those are entirely unrelated. I just want to sort of add that there. All right, let me just see if I'm... Oh, yeah, the other thing I wanted to say, too, is... Whoops. Maybe the most useful thing, actually, are these little figures I found. You can ignore all the writing. They're just sort of fun. Anyway, okay, yeah, so I didn't have any limitations. Oh, another thing also, I'm going to definitely run out of time. My schooling in a lot of areas was I was left entirely alone to do anything I wanted for years on end. I mean, no constraints whatsoever. Okay, so I would say that through most of my formative years, half of my effort was deciding what would I do, and the second half of how to do it. And in fact, when I went to high school and there were classes and people actually told me I had to be at a certain place, I was mortified. I was in tears. Okay, so my upbringing was very, very much left on my own. You know, it was with a lot of support, but no one had me, had to do anything. And that had some good points and some bad points. My parents were definitely themselves thoughtful. My mother picked up computer graphics when she was 61, so they were definitely thoughtful people. I was always sort of recognized and acknowledged. I'm just trying to think. Again, I think the figures are probably the most relevant thing here. Okay. Again, I want to be sure that people don't forget this, because I think it really is not always understood. The amount of work to learn anything is a frickin' pain in the ass. You've got to think about whether the rewards for that are worth it to the person. We're not talking about just a class. We're talking about thinking hard for possibly years or decades, as on end. You've got to think what could possibly compensate people for that, whatever the answer for that is. It can't be treated as the grade for that course. That's off by a factor of 100. But in terms of what you need, in terms of the amount of work required, unless you're very, very special. But that's been my experience, Okay, I would say that encouraging creativity and innovation curiosity, just do it that way yourself. And in fact, one of the criticisms I have about the school that I went to, not a big one, the one that sort of left me to do whatever I wanted, is that all the role models there were people interested in creative teaching. So there were no physics people, no dancers, no artists. There were only creative teachers. And so there weren't many role models for what to do other than the creative teacher. That's sort of a random point. Okay, I would say that being creative and innovative, you don't have to work at doing that. That's natural. The problem is everyone's been told what to do, when to do it, and how to do it for so long that they've lost the ability. It's not that they don't have to be taught the ability, they just have to have it not completely damaged. That's another thing I feel pretty strongly. Now, of course, I'm coming from an environment that's extreme in that case, but then that may be the point, at least it's one data point, And I'm not saying there aren't problems with that environment either. I'm hardly taking the high ground. There are different issues, but in terms of this group, it's probably worth saying. I would communicate as, saying that children treating you as an equal. Definitely, I was treated as an equal. This was like one of these earlier conversations. I guess, sentient being as well as just being an equal, like a short person, but an equal, And then again, how your students feel while learning. Uh-oh, I'm really out of time. All right. It matters at least as much as any academic knowledge or skills you or they have. And in fact, they've done a lot of studies on coaching, particularly coaching women's teams, where simply getting to know the people well between the coach and the people. I know people personally, and I've read about the national soccer team. Just knowing the people and caring about them had more of an effect on their performance than almost anything. That was less true with the men's teams, interestingly, but at least there's a broad spectrum of people. I had the title on my business card of feminist engineer for many years until I got exhausted of answering what that meant. But what it meant was doing engineering with the focus on sort of thinking about what embedded emotional and social assumptions are there in choosing what engineering is even useful for. Like this dancing iron dust thing. People say, oh, sorry, this is my last thing. I really am. Wait, I'm over time. Okay. All I was going to say is someone once saw the dancing iron dust thing and said, what the hell did they ever do to you to cause you to build something like that? And I think that's a good question. Sorry, thanks. Hopefully that covers something.